No, we watched it years ago, but old people forget what.
I get it now. I get other episodes. I like anything Jim Caviezel's in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's got a thing called The Outlander. If you never have
I've
watched
seen
that, he's an alien from another planet. He comes down with a bunch of Vikings, and they're fighting an alien creature. But yeah, person of interest, and
Kind of scary.
yeah,
And what all them cameras are watching.
they know everything about us. And then, you know, I watch these crime shows too, the Rookie and everything like that. And it used to be that all they had on you, they could run your license plate on your car, but now they have your DNA, and you know, a lot of that stuff now. I tell you what, one of the trickiest things I know is they've got everybody interested in their genetic heritage. You're Indian, or if you're black, or you're African, or you're Scottish, or whatever. But if you get one of those kits and send in what kind of sample they want, and they run your DNA, then you're in the system then, and that's all they really want. They don't care who your uncle is or who your granddaddy was, but millions of people now think that they were just doing something that was cute, but the thing is that if there's this serial killer or this murderer out there, they may have never been in the Army, they've never been arrested, they've never had a DNA test, but there may be 5 or 6 people in his family who have submitted that to genealogy.com or ancestry.com, and they can find that person by their niece or nephew or their child or their brother or sister.
Narrow it down.
Yep. They can find, and you know, like I said, it's used for good and evil, but they've got you. We all carry on.
My ancestors was moonshiners and bootleggers.
Yeah. I heard a comedian, listened to a comedian last night. He said he was talking Black Power and nothing about Africa and Kunta Kinte and all that, and then he found out he's 75% white. Real disappointment, shock.
Yeah, he's traced ours back. He said some of our ancestors have a castle over in Scotland, but they've never invited us over.
I don't see how they know you came from this community and this country and all. I just don't see how they know all that.
Well, I don't know that they do, you know.
Yeah.
That's the thing about it. When people that are way smarter than you start telling you things, you don't really know whether they know what you're talking about or not.
Yeah.
All right. Our scripture last week, we ended up at the 6th verse of chapter 3 in Judges, and we're picking up at verse 7 actually. But the main scripture for today's lesson is actually in chapter 6, the latter part of chapter 6. But as we look at this, Joshua, you know, Moses died and Joshua took over, and Joshua fought, and he told them several different times, you know, stay close to the Lord, follow the Lord, follow his rules, his guidance, and is what he's told you to do. And yeah, we'll do it. We promise we'll do it. And he said, no, you won't. And they said, oh yeah, we will. And they said, no, you won't. And sure enough, it says, and he lived and he died when he's 110. And he said, Eleazar died. And then there was no one to lead the people. So they said, well, okay, I guess we'll do whatever we want to now. That's kind of the age we live in now, is that we'll do whatever we want to. But it's just kind of disheartening, I guess, to look as you read through Judges just in a few verses. You go through about 300 years of history, and the people are happy and things are going great and they're serving God, and all of a sudden they said, well, that's working well, let's change it. So they start taking in these idols and start worshiping the Baals and the Asherahs because it looks like fun. And they said, well, you know, we'll still worship God, but we'll get in on all this other stuff too. And but it is something that we need to remember, is that it's very important. It's essential that we continue to follow God and follow what He does. But as we start off in the first part of chapter 3, it's been we're the judges. The period of the judges. There are 12 judges actually that are mentioned, and one or two of them only has one verse and says, yeah, and he came next, and then after him was. But some of them have some pretty long stories, and a couple of them, it really tells you in depth more about their life. But there was 12 in total that they pretty much consider as judges. But everybody had decided to start doing what they wanted to do because they didn't have anybody else telling them what to do. And so it was whoever decided to take charge, he made the rules. And so things weren't going well. Their enemies, they no longer could resist their enemies. When their enemies came against them and they thought they was going to win, they wouldn't win. And things started going bad for them, and they started crying out to God. You know, it doesn't matter what we do in rebellion against God or how much we rebel against what He's told us to do. When it really comes down to it, we say, God, why have you forsaken us? Why are you treating us this way, God? Why won't you let me get through traffic? You know, but we always find a way to blame God for what we have done. And so people started crying out to God and complaining, so He says, okay, I'll send somebody. The first one that is considered a judge, we've already heard a little bit about in the latter part of Joshua. Othniel, which was Caleb's nephew. You remember, as we talked about briefly, just kind of in passing, as they were going through and taking possession of the land, they came to this one particular place in an area that had been designated as the tribe where Caleb was going to live. He said, whoever takes and conquers this particular city, I will give my daughter as a bride. And his nephew, which these days it sounds a little odd, but back then it was not uncommon, because really that's what they had to choose from. But his nephew, Othniel, went and took his army in there and captured the city, and he gave him his daughter. And it says, you remember, it says his daughter came back to Caleb and said, hey, you've given us all this land, but we don't have any water. Give us springs. And they gave him the upper and the lower springs. And that's kind of the last part of the thing that you hear about what Joshua did, or what Caleb did. This Caleb also died. But Othniel went on, evidently, that wasn't the last thing he did. He became, once the people started crying out and he said, well, okay, I'll take it. And he went out and led the army and freed the people. And after, they had been mistreated and held as slaves to these people, he went out and fought against them, and he won. And the land saw peace for 40 years after all. Then it says, then he died. And they said, okay, we don't have a leader again. We can go do what we want to do again. And they did. And after they had rebelled against God again, he turned them over to their enemies once again. And for 18 years, they were in slavery. And then there was a man, next judge that came up was Ehud. And it's kind of odd, I always thought, the first thing you hear about Ehud is he was left-handed. These days we don't think that much about left-handed, but it's still a little bit different, a little bit off sometimes, we think. Well, back then, if you were left-handed, it was like you were deformed or retarded or something, you know. Left-handed was considered to be, you know, it's, most things these days. These days, you know, there for a while it seemed like everything was made for a right-handed person. And now everything's made for iPhone. And I got an Android. So, you know, when I go looking for something, I got to say, well, okay, will it work with an Android? No, it's made for iPhone. But he was left-handed, so it was, in those days, that was, so he wasn't any count for anything. You know, nobody thought that he was much of a threat because he was left-handed. But he went, the Lord came upon him and told him what he needed to do, and he had gone to the king to pay tribute. They had to pay tribute or taxes or whatever. The kings didn't really, in these particular times, they didn't really do anything. They just wanted your money. Just give us your money and we'll let you alone. So he had come with his group, and they came before the king, and they said, here's our tribute. And they turned around and left, and they went a ways until they kind of got out of the little city. And Ehud turned around, he said, y'all fellas, go ahead, I've got to go back to something I need to tell the king. Well, during this period of time of captivity, the Israelites were not allowed to have any kind of weapons. Spears, knives, shields, anything. They weren't. All they had was their tools that they worked with. But Ehud had slipped around and made himself a small dagger. And it was probably about 18 inches long total. So it was a pretty good sized dagger, but it's a small sword, a large dagger, I guess. And he carried it on it says on his right thigh. So it was covered by his robes and everything. And he went back and he talked to the king, and he said, King, he said, I have some information I need to give you, but it's private. I need to tell you in secret. So the king said, okay. He didn't feel very threatened. He had just brought his tribute and everything, and after all, he's left-handed. What's he going to do, you know? So he sent everybody out. So it's just them two in there. And he reached down and grabbed that knife and said the king was very big and fat, sitting up on his throne, and he kind of stepped over to see what Ehud had to say to him. He pulled that dagger out, and he said it stuck it all the way in. Said it went blade, hilt, and everything. The whole thing went up into this guy's big old fat belly, evidently. And he said, and the fat closed around it so that you couldn't even see it. It was gone. And he said his bowels spilled out on the floor. It's real nice situation. Well, he went over and locked the door, and he snuck out another way somehow. So his people were standing out there, and they said, well, it's been a little while, we better go check. And they checked, and the door was locked, and they could smell the smell. So they said, well, he's relieving himself. So we'll give him a little time. We'll give him a little privacy. Well, they waited and waited and waited, and finally they said, this has been way too long. We need to go find out. So they took the key and opened the door and found him. He was laying in there dead. By then, he was gone. And he went back to the people, and he said, he called the people to arms, and he said, God has given us this army. Their king is dead, and God has given us this army, and he led them to a victory. And so they had 80 years of peace after that. Then Shamgar, he only gets like one verse. And said, then Shamgar came, and he killed 600 men with a cattle prod, basically. It was a long stick that had a point on one end of it. And he killed 600 men with that thing. And that's all we know about him. We don't know how long they had been in slavery. We don't know how long they lived in peace after that, but he killed 600. After that comes Deborah. Deborah is the first and only female judge. And it's kind of odd that she had the position that she did, but she was kind of like a prophetess to a certain extent. But they would come to her and you know, for advice, and she was leading them as a judge. And they were living in peace. And or they were in slavery again at this point, and so she come in and she's living, and so she went out to King Jabin of the Canaanites was in charge. He was the one that had them enslaved, and he had 900 chariots of iron, as they refer to them, chariots that are probably weren't made of iron, but they were shielded in iron and trimmed in iron. And Barak was the leader of the Israelite armies as such as they had. So Deborah goes to him and he said, you need to, God has told me that he has given us victory. We just need to go take it from the Canaanites. And Barak, I don't know if he doubted her a little bit or what. He said, I'll go if you go, but I ain't going without you. So she said, well, okay, I'll go. But because of your doubt, you won't get the glory for it. A woman will get the glory for it. And this is kind of an odd story. Barak goes and as he starts out, his people are going against these 900 chariots, plus they've got their other military people. But you think about it, chariots got the wheels, you know, there. God sent a storm. And a lot of water fell real fast, so the chariots started sinking into the mud. And they weren't any good. They couldn't use them anymore. They were just, you know, these guys are used to fighting in chariots, you know. When they're sitting still, they kind of like, they're at a disadvantage. They don't know how to, they haven't trained for that. Barak and his army came in and he killed 10,000 people. He killed every one of them. But the king, King Jabin, climbed out of his chariot that was marred up to the axles and took off running. And he got away, and he got to this little town. And there was a little town, a lady named Joel lived. This town was known to have good relations with the king. So when she saw the king come running into town, looked like he was under distress, she said, here, come over here, you can hide in my tent. So he said, okay, and he came in there and she covered him up and she was going to let him take a little nap, and he said, well, I'm a little thirsty, could I have some water? And he said, she gave him milk. That was just fine, that made him feel better. He said, well, I'm going to take a nap, you kind of keep watching. If anybody comes in, tell them there's nobody here. She said, okay. So she waited till he got asleep, and then she took a tent stake and drove it through his temple and pinned him to the ground. You can just imagine, you know, next time you go to make her mad before you go to sleep at night, think about that. So she just drove the tent stake right through his temple into the ground, pinned him to the ground. And in a little bit, Barak come in and was looking, he tracked him down. He says, where he came, I'm going to find him. And she said, hey, I know where he's at, he's right in here. I got him kind of pinned down. So then the victory was won and the victory was declared. And Deborah, it has, you know, like a chapter and a half, it seems like, 31 verses, I think, of a song of Deborah. And at the end of it, it says, and a woman ended up killing the king, so this woman got the glory for it instead of Barak. He killed 10,000 men, but she killed the king, so she wins. And after that period of time, after that had lived its course and she had died, evidently, the people turned away from God again. Seemed like every time it was the same old thing. They would have a judge, they would have a leader, and they was doing good, and they was worshiping God, and God was blessing them, and God was giving them the peace that they wanted, and giving them everything that they needed. And then they would turn away from God, and they'd end up in slavery again. And every time they'd cry to God and say, God, why did you let this happen to us? But every time, it was always because of the way they acted. So shortly after, as they had turned from God again, God sent a prophet. And he said, God sent Moses into Egypt. He led you out of Egypt. He led you across the wilderness. He led you into this land. He gave you all of this land. He handed it over to you, basically. But you haven't been faithful. You've turned from him. All he asked was that you obey him and that you worship him, and you refused. You've turned against him. And God has brought you down. God keeps knocking you down every time you turn away from him. It says obedience continues to be an unpopular subject even today with Christians, but it is absolutely necessary to maintain a thriving relationship with God. We run into the same thing. If we're rebelling against God, God is not going to help us. God's not going to help you do something he doesn't want you to do. So if you feel like you're struggling trying to get something done and can't get it done, then maybe you ain't supposed to be doing it. Maybe you need to talk to God a little more about it and find out. You know, God will allow things to get in your way sometimes. He will allow things to make it a little tougher on you just to test your resolve and test your faith. But if it just keeps on knocking you down, keeps on knocking you down, and you seem to be losing ground instead of gaining ground, then you might need to examine it and find out if you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. So the prophet had come to him and he told him, he said, okay, you keep blaming it on God, but it ain't God. Moses told you, Joshua told you, over and over again, you have been told, and God just continues to send people to try to tell you the way to happiness is through him. And you keep turning away from him, and you keep rebelling against him. It's you, it's not him. Things had gotten pretty bad, and the people were doing pretty much what they wanted to do again. But the Canaanite people and the Amalekites had come, the Midianites and the Amalekites had come in, and they had taken over, and they were holding. It wasn't so much that they were in slavery, but they were the original terrorists, I guess. What they would do is they would come in, and about the time that the Israelites would get their crops ready to harvest, they'd come in and destroy them or steal them. Either burn down their wheat or come in and take it away from them or whatever. And basically what they were trying to do is leave the Israelites with no food, no way to live, and get rid of them in that way rather than having to go to battle. Or keep them so weak and so busy trying to make just a little something to eat that they didn't have time to fight against them. So they were trying to keep the Israelites weak. So as we come into today's lesson, we come up in Gideon. He's of the tribe of Manasseh, and the smallest tribe, and the smallest family in that tribe, and then he is the youngest of his family. So he said, I'm on the bottom of the pole. I'm the very bottom rung. And he's just trying to get by. He's trying to feed his family. So it says he's threshing wheat in a wine press. Now y'all have probably seen enough about, might have even been around when this was happening, threshing wheat. Usually, if you go into these barns, you see a barn and it's what they call a shotgun barn. You open up the front door and you open the back door and you can see all the way through it. Well, the reason a lot of times they made it that way is you lay the wheat out on there and you would beat on the wheat and the wind would blow through and blow the chaff out and leave the wheat laying on the floor. But the whole idea was to let the wind do part of the work. If the wind wasn't blowing enough, then you would take a pitchfork and throw it up in the air. The wheat would fall back down in and the chaff would blow away. And that's how you separated it out. Well, if they did that, it was clouds of smoke and junk and dust everywhere and could be seen for miles around, and the Midianites would come and say, hey, there's some wheat, let's go get it. So they would come steal all the wheat. So here's Gideon, he's saying, if I'm going to get any that I get to keep, I'm going to have to hide it. So he got down in the wine press, so it's down in the ground so that it can't be seen. And he's threshing the wheat, and he's trying to get a little bit, just enough for a few meals for his family. It says the angel of the Lord appeared to him. We've talked about this before. It's called a theophany or a Christophany. It's basically appearance of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. When it says the angel of the Lord, if it says a messenger from the Lord, or Michael the archangel, or Gabriel, or anything like that, then it's an angel. But if it just says the angel of the Lord, most of the time it was most likely Jesus. And he appears to Gideon, and he said, blessed are you among men, blessed are you. And Gideon said, well, if we're so blessed, why is all this stuff happening to us? Again, it ain't our fault, you know. And the prophet had just told him through Deborah that, or after Deborah, so the prophet came to him and told him, yeah, it's your fault. You're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. But I believe, just like now, no matter how bad a shape the Israelites got in, there was some people that probably were still faithfully worshiping God. And they were suffering the same as the ones who were not. So they felt mistreated, or felt like that they were not getting a fair shake. But Gideon said, why is it like that? And he said, God has abandoned us. And the angel of the Lord told him, he said, by your strength, you're going to lead an army and you're going to wipe them out just like it was one man. Basically, it's like Gideon was saying, well, we're in this mess, and it seems like you've abandoned us, and when are you going to help us out? And basically God told him, he says, right now. But this brings something, and I made myself a little note here because I see this happening. I've heard of it happening several times. I know when it occurs to you that something needs to be done, there's usually a reason it occurred to you. If you start complaining to God about how bad things are and asking Him to fix it, more times than not you're going to find out you're part of the answer. You're going to be part of the answer. You're going to be involved in fixing it. If God lays it on your heart for something to be done, then that's telling you, I want you to be part of it. I want you to be involved in it. So often we don't see to it. It's I've heard preachers talking about before, have people, church members coming into their office and say, well, preacher, I think we need to have a group that does this and this and this and this and all this kind of stuff. I think it'd be a really good ministry for the church. And the preacher said, sounds great. Let me know how it goes. No, I ain't talking about me leading it. And said, well, God told you about it, not me. He came to you. He didn't come to me. He must want you to do it. But we need to be willing. If we got a complaint, we need to be willing to be part of the fix, part of the solution. And I think that goes for anything that we're doing in life or in church. I don't think you got a right to complain if you're not willing to help fix the problem. You may not even know what the solution is, but you need to at least be willing, once somebody comes with a good solution, you need to be willing to say, okay, I'll get behind that, I'll help with that. But so often we sit back we wait on things to be done for us. And we look for things to be just perfect. Where a lot of times I think God puts us somewhere to help with the problem. If God reveals something to you, it's because He has given you something that's going to help you be part of the solution. And we need to recognize that, and we need to act on that, and we need to be willing and have the courage to say yes to God and say, God, I don't know how. But you know, He came to Moses, and He says, I want you to go call my children, bring my children out. Moses said, oh, I think you got the wrong guy. I said, no, I've got exactly the right guy. And He provided everything Moses needed to complete everything He wanted him to do. And then when Moses was done, he'd already prepared Caleb. Oh, he'd already prepared Joshua and then Caleb. And God has already got the plan figured out. He already knows what your part is and how you're going to contribute. And if He's calling you and asking you to be a part of it, you need to be willing to say, okay, I don't know how, I don't feel adequate. God has chosen all through the Bible. He's chosen people who the world didn't think were up to the job. He called Gideon. Gideon said, hey, Manasseh's the smallest tribe, that's my tribe, and my family is the smallest family of all of Manasseh, and I am the youngest of my family. He said, I'm not your guy. But you remember when God sent the prophet Samuel out to anoint a new king after Saul had messed up. He sent him to the house of Jesse. Jesse had 12 sons. And he went through and he said, nope, not you, nope, not you, nope, not you. And they said, well, that's all we got. He said, this is all the sons you've got? Oh, well, we got David. He's out with the sheep, but he's just a young kid. Samuel said, okay, I'll wait, go get him. And he walked in and Samuel said, you the one, the smallest, the youngest. God doesn't go out and choose warriors. God goes out and makes warriors. He sees in you something that you don't see in yourself. Ray Boltz wrote a song about that. He said, you may see a shepherd, but God may see a king. Sometimes we don't see potential in our lives because we don't see from God's eyes. But God knows that if we will allow Him to, we can do much more than whatever considered in our minds. And we need to be willing to yield to that. As we get into next week, we'll see more about what Gideon did and how it's a pretty funny story. You know, he tests God a little bit. He said, okay, God, if you're really serious. And we think sometimes in our own lives, when God comes and asks us, God, I think things messed up there. If you really want me to do this, you know, it's like I heard a story one time. It's supposed to have been a true story. And professor was talking about how God was not real and He was dead and all this kind of stuff. And this student kept standing up for his faith, and the professor decided he was just going to. He said, "Well, if God is such a great God and such a wonderful God, I'm going to take this piece of chalk and I'm going to drop it. And when it hits the floor, if it don't break, then I'll believe your God is in control." And just as he said that, the chalk slipped out of his hand, fell down, hit his coat, slid down his leg, caught in the cuff of his pants, and rolled out onto the floor. And everybody stood around, you know, and of course, well, that don't count, you know. But that's kind of what Gideon does, and we'll study about that this week. But read about Gideon, think about it, and And as you read these stories about these people, I think it's good for us to look into our lives and see, well, have I ever done that? Well, probably have. You've heard all your life about putting the fleece out, you know, laying the fleece out before the Lord, and this is where it came from Gideon. So let's study and try to learn from that, and how our lives could be different if we would follow these examples. Father, we thank you so much for this morning, for this opportunity to be here, and for these that have come to be a part of this time of study and a time of discussion. Lord, thank you for the scriptures that you've given us to direct us and lead us. God, now give us faith, give us strength, give us courage that we can follow what you have laid out before us. Help us, Lord, to take lesson and take notice, Lord, of how through history you have done so many wonderful things in our lives. We have right here in this room this morning mentioned things, Lord, that we know you intervened in our lives and done to protect us or to help us or to keep us from harm. And Lord, if we continue to look at our lives and go back through times in our lives, we will continuously see places where you have intervened, where you have shown your power, you have changed things, or you have directed things in such a way that it benefited us. And God, help us to trust that. Help us to understand you're still the same God. You still have the power. The same power that rose Jesus from the grave, Lord, lives in us. And help us, God, to trust that and to believe in that. Go with us now as we continue to worship. We now honor you. It's in Christ's name. Amen.